Tonight, we are hoping to explore the role of the imagination and memory, and the role that both of these items have played in Canada and in Ireland, particularly in the world of letters. With this in mind, I would like to invite Anne Enright to the stage. Anne, of course, is the distinguished Booker Prize-winning author of such celebrated books as The Gathering, The Last Waltz, and The Green Road. And the wonderful news is that she will be joining the faculty of the Creative Writing Department here at UCD this fall. The 2017 Ireland Fiction Laureate, she is known to readers all over the world and is much loved by her Canadian readers. A little-known fact about Anne Enright is that she spent 1 year in Canada as a teenager. Please welcome Anne Enright.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you. I'm not in UCD yet. I'm a figment of UCD future, a ghost of UCD future. Very much looking forward to it. This isn't really a talk or a lecture, it's just a few thoughts about connections, unconnected thoughts about connections. I went to Canada in 1979 for 2 years with some lovely Canadian funding for a scholarship in a place called the Lester B. Pearson College of the Pacific. It's an international school outside Victoria on Vancouver Island, set in the trees and forests there. In my first English class there, the teacher, who's called Theo, handed out a sheet with 3 poems to discuss. The first was a kind of winsome, tough little poem by E.E. Cummings called My Sweet Old Etc. My sweet old etc. Aunt Lucy, during the last war, could, and what's more, did tell you what everyone was fighting for. The second was a poem I already knew by Keats, La Belle Dame sans merci, which is about death, more or less, in the form of a beautiful woman, which is not, I suspect, the way that death will come to me. It contains the line, she looked at me as she did love, and made sweet moan. Well, said Theo, we all know what that means. Well, I thought, we certainly didn't. Not until you pointed it out, and after class, I took him to task for turning this wonderful, beautiful, high and sacred object by Keats, dragging it through the muck. I was really angry. I accused him, basically, of having a dirty mind. I was 16. Theo Dombrowski was then 36. He grew up in Port Alberni, a logging town on Vancouver Island, which is pervaded by the stink of the sawmill, or was in those days, not unlike the high note you got in the Liffey back in the days of the Clondalkin paper mills. In this small town, Theo fell in love with his wife, Eileen, learned to play that fine Polish instrument, the box accordion, taught himself piano, listened to opera, tried his hand as an artist, and got himself all the way to the University of British Columbia, where he wrote a doctoral thesis on Ulysses by James Joyce. Not many Joyceans jogged in 1979, but Theo did jog. He also swam, lumberjacked, and taught Ukrainian dancing. Theo could do anything, including the rude bits of Keats. He loved a good fight. There was a major Barney over the Tundish scene in The Portrait of the Artist as a young man. It got a bit physical. Cushions were thrown. I was too busy quivering with outraged disbelief in that first class to listen to the third poem, though a line of it stayed with me for many years after. Each time I hit a key on my electric typewriter, speaking of peaceful trees, another village explodes. I got an electric typewriter when I turned 21 as a present from my family. This was long before the pattering hush of the electronic keyboard. Electric typewriters are really fierce objects. They're very mechanical. They're the Gatling gun of the typing life. And these remembered lines became set in the rhythms of my typing and also in my terror of the blank page each time I hit a key on my electric typewriter. Another village explodes. Because, of course, I had lost the peaceful trees from the quotation over time. A few years ago, I chased the reference in one of my letters to Theo, and he sent it to me again. Chosen for the class, he said, because of its wonderful, sinister nervousness. It was called "It is Dangerous to Read Newspapers," and it was by Margaret Atwood. In the poem, she's beset by images of violence, war, and mass slaughter. It's hard to tell if the poet's anxiety is for herself or for the victims. I am the cause, she says, although she is not the cause or barely the cause of a world in which corpses are bulldozed into pits. It's Dangerous to Read Newspapers owes something to the flayed sensibility of Plath, and it's stalled in the same kind of murderous passivity as My Life Had Stood a Loaded Gun by Emily Dickinson. But the poem is also a challenge to the writer's neurotic distance from the world, how we thrive on pain, even the pain of others, without doing anything to fix it. Atwood is Theo's favourite writer, or as he tactfully came to say after I started to publish, his other favourite writer. Later that year, Theo gave me her second novel, Surfacing, to read, in which a woman loses herself, both literally and metaphorically, in the forests of northern Quebec. Maybe he was just trying to get me out of the house. I was 17 and spent a lot of time smoking and having large thoughts about myself. Surfacing seemed to be a guide to having your nervous breakdown out in the fresh air, of which there is no shortage in Canada. The school I was in was always dragging you out into it. I'd find myself stumbling along some or other trail to find cougar tracks across an empty beach, eat mussels as long as your hand picked fresh from the rocks. At the end of the first of these hikes, still jet-lagged, after ospreys and cormorants, no orcas, but maybe a sea otter, unless it was a seal. No, it was 2 sea otters there in the kelp. After all of this, I staggered into a camping ground to find the driftwood already stacked, with the bags of marshmallows heaped, the chord sequence of 4 strong winds printed out on probably laminated cards, and a line of portaloos standing guard in a clearing. And behind the portaloos were hundreds of whispering miles of old-growth forest. And what did it whisper? Enjoy your marshmallows. My goodness, they look good. If you've ever been on the west coast of British Columbia, you will remember the height of the Douglas fir, the cool grey of the Sitka spruce, and the way this relentless verticality is broken by the arbutus, a broadleaf evergreen with easy curving branches and a red outer bark that flakes over an inner bark that is cool, smooth, and almost green. It's a little like our own Kerry strawberry tree, a little like the tree they call in Latin America the gringo tree, because it peels red, just like a white man's skin. This arbutus is the most touchable, the most climbable tree you could imagine. And though I've seen the scrubby Irish version as far away as Australia, the magnificent Arbutus menziesii does not travel much or well. It's hard to propagate because, according to Theo, before it germinates, the seed has to pass through the digestive tract of a particular bird. I think there are 2 specimens in Ireland, and they're both lonely. One of them is outside the canteen in RTE, just a mile down the road, a relic of botanical tourism undertaken in the late 19th century by the owners of Montrose House. Although when I was in Canada, I stayed indoors smoking and talking while heartier students rescued beached whales and scaled mountains, I did, quietly and out of the corner of my eye, really love that tree. In my mid-20s, I worked as a producer in RTE television, and I left one or other meeting with management in Montrose House to walk over to the canteen looking for a cup of coffee or a place to cry. And the tree was there for me as a clear and growing representation of other realities, languages, and possibilities. At Christmas, the first year I was in Canada, we went to Winnipeg for deep cold, staying with a student's family in a kind of gingerbread house, a thing with wooden eaves and shutters and triple glazing. There was more food, more baking, more cinnamon and eggnog than I thought possible. It was a non-stop round of kindness, ease, bounty, cross-country skiing, patterned socks, and positivity. I am still, slightly suspicious of positivity, which means I'm always a stranger in some parts of Canada. Another Christmas was spent in a cabin with 3 other students on Galliano Island in the Juan de Fuca Strait, my first sight of a forest landscape after fire, when we hiked in darkness over the spine of the island to fill our rucksacks with oysters, which we ate for 3 or 4 days after. I don't know why it was dark. Perhaps being teenagers, we just forgot to get up during the day. My recollection of those years is also the recollection of enormous, wonderful, epic sleeping I did in one place or another. After Galliano, I went up to Powell River to stay with another student, a member of the Tliaman First Nation, whose family let me sleep undisturbed by eggnog or cinnamon buns or hay rides or fun. That was the week it snowed in BC. And if you think Ireland panics in the snow, then my goodness, you should chase yourself some weather down the western edge of Canada, where no one has snow tires and cars slew into each other on the forest roads, not because the surface is slippy, but because the drivers are just gone hysterical. At the end of the 2 years, I hitchhiked from Victoria to Calgary with 2 female friends up over the Rockies to get our fill of bears, brown bears at the town dumpsters and on a ridge. On the day we crossed the Continental Divide, the standing shape of a grizzly, or is that my organizing brain to put a bear that's known for the ridge on his neck in the place where the planet gathers itself up into a ridge that runs the length of North America? I don't know, but I do remember the bear as we stuck our thumbs out for a lift from one of our other crazy guy in a pickup truck. The guys in the pickups were, without a single exception, crazy. And they kept us safe. For reading material on that trip, I brought this book, which is The Edible Woman by Margaret Atwood. And this is the first time, I think, that I'd read a book which contained ideas about being a woman that I might find useful. It doesn't seem like a lot to ask. That a novel should give you something to think about, that it might bring you that bit further on. Bringing us all a bit further on is a habit of Atwood's, though sometimes we have to double back in order to find it, as the world recently discovered revisiting The Handmaid's Tale. Though I have to say it made sense to me the first time round, which was in 1985. This was the year my reading caught up with Atwood's writing, and I realized that there would be future books if I knew how to wait for them. Meanwhile, back in 1981, The Edible Woman was the thing I brought home from Canada. It went into my luggage for the flight home, another epic sleeping event, which involved an engine failing or actually dropping off, although that doesn't seem possible, and me waking up on the tarmac expecting Amsterdam and finding Edmonton. Because I was there so young, Canada still seems to be a place separated from my adult life, both by geography and by time. It's really hard for me to make connections. I didn't think it was possible, for example, that the writer S.E. Edugyan could live in Colwood, which is the local pharmacy where we used to go to buy shampoo. How could a writer live in Colwood, of all places? Returning to Victoria for a writers' festival, someone pointed out Carol Shields' house. I go to a party at the bookseller Jack Monroe's, and I really don't believe this can be real. I read his ex-wife Alice Munro's work in order to be reminded of Canada, and now here I am somehow impossibly back in those books, or in Alice Munro's life before she wrote them, or in my own life before I read them, though I lived just down the road. Another time in Toronto, crossing the Bloor Street Viaduct, the site of Andace's first chapter in The Skin of a Lion, a place more important to me than Niagara is down the road, banging on the window of the minivan, the way Theo Dombrowski from Port Alberni might give an involuntary yelp at the sight of the James Joyce Tower. People have a thing about Ireland. They put all kinds of significance into the place. Canada does something similar for me. Maybe instead of resisting it, we should give in to the landscape's ability to make things matter for those who pass through. In Newfoundland, I talked to Lisa Moore on a ferry that sails from Farewell to Fogo. And I don't know if it's the writer or her work or the remoteness of the spot. Perhaps it is those peaceful trees. But I realize that a mood of many years is lifting just there. It is time to go home and do some typing.